Even if Kurt Wagner, aka Nightcrawler, is one of the most beloved and wholesome X-Men out there, he is actually one of the most messed up, confusing, and heartbreaking family trees out there. Through the decades, we have seen his origin changing and evolving through mysterious cases of secret parents, memory wipes, prophetic sacrifices, and magic-wielding foster families. While X-Men lore in general takes you to some batshit corners, Nightcrawler's lineage really just never stops being an absolute shocker. For decades at a stretch, we were led to believe that he was the son of Mystique and Azazel, but that was dismissed when the third issue of X-Men Forever revealed that Destiny was his parent. From there on, as time passed, Nightcrawler's family tree just kept sprawling across crazy new directions. The same craziness bled through the latest episode of X-Men 97 Season 2, as we see a very Catholic and God-trusting Nightcrawler, owing to his moral compass, to scrap up a team to go to the savage land and save his anti-mutant bigot of a half-brother, Graydon Creed, against the Acolytes. I know the dynamics might have gotten confusing for everyone when Kurt started calling Rogue his sister and Creed his brother. So, without wasting another moment, let's discuss the polarizing family tree of the Nightcrawler. Mystique. Mystique, aka Raven Darkholme, is one of the oldest, most dangerous, and morally complex characters in the X-Men lore. She has spent more than a century reinventing herself through her deception and espionage skills. Unlike many X-Men villains who basically seek to dominate the world or cause utter destruction, Mystique has always been driven by her need to survive. She grew up in a mutant-fearing world, and so she learned from a very early age that the safest way to survive was to become someone else. Even if Mystique is said to be cold and unfeeling, much of her humanity actually comes from her complicated family. For most of Marvel Comics history, we thought Mystique was Nightcrawler's biological mother, and not just that, everyone kept questioning the identity of his father, and it ended up becoming one of the X-Men's biggest mysteries. But as the decades passed, that mystery kept evolving until it was finally revealed in X-Men Blue Origins that Nightcrawler is indeed the biological son of Mystique and Destiny, who is better known as Irene Adler. In a rather strange ordeal, Mystique apparently used her shape-shifting powers to completely alter her body in a way that allowed her to genetically father a child. So, yeah, it was actually Destiny who conceived Kurt. This revelation surely fulfilled an idea that the legendary X-Men writer Chris Claremont had originally intended decades earlier, but could not publish because of the Comics Code Authority's restrictions on LGBTQ+ relationships. However, their happiness was very short-lived, because Destiny foresaw how Kurt would go on to become a crucial superhero one day and shape the future of mutant kind. She also knew that his life would be in danger from Azazel in the coming future, and so she cooked up an intricate plan to ensure Kurt would be safe before he was eventually capable of standing against him. So, Mystique led Azazel to believe that he was Nightcrawler's father by manipulating the memories around his birth to preserve his future. But because of the chaos that followed, Mystique had no choice but to run away with her infant son when an angry mob chased them after being horrified by the baby's blue skin, tail, and demonic appearance. She then hid the baby safely near a tree in the woods and left him to go back and save Destiny from the mob. But everything went sideways when she lost track of Kurt in the chaos that ensued. She could not bear the guilt of being the reason for losing him, so she had Professor Charles Xavier implant her mind with false memories of her throwing the baby away out of spite. Although Mystique surely had reasons for letting Kurt grow up away from her, the emotional consequences were devastating, as Nightcrawler spent his childhood believing he had been abandoned because he looked like a monster. As he looked the way he did, Kurt's earliest memories of himself were about how he tried to hide from ordinary people as they thought him to be a demon. These experiences profoundly influenced his personality, and instead of becoming bitter, Kurt developed extraordinary empathy and compassion thus eventually becoming one of the X-Men's moral centers. When Kurt finally encountered Mystique years later as an X-Man, their relationship was immediately strained. He recognized that they shared the same blue skin and yellow eyes, and suspected she was his mother, but Mystique refused to answer his questions and instead kept taunting him by withholding the truth. Even after Kurt eventually learned she was his biological parent, their relationship remained complicated, especially after all the decades of lies, manipulation, and emotional distance. Moreover, Mystique has always struggled to express her love openly by choosing to be quiet and pragmatic over being honest, but Kurt has repeatedly forgiven her despite the pain she caused him. Margali Zardos. So, after being left in that forest, Kurt ultimately ended up in the care of the sorceress Margali Zardos, who raised him in a traveling circus. Now, Margali Zardos was a powerful sorceress and practitioner of the mystical winding way. In the original comics, Margali actually claimed that she found the blue-skinned infant beside his dying mother and decided to raise him as her own. But in reality, the more recent continuity that had been established in X-Men Blue Origins revealed that Destiny had intentionally given her baby Kurt to Margali, as it was also a part of her carefully orchestrated plan to protect him and ensure that he fulfilled his future destiny. In fact, the sorceress, Margali Zardos, actually debuted in X-Men Annual Issue number 4, which was also written by Chris Claremont and John Romita Jr. Margali apparently lived with a traveling circus in Germany, where she worked publicly as a fortune teller while secretly practicing powerful magic. The circus also proved to be the perfect home for Kurt, as he was surrounded by performers, acrobats, and people who were considered to be outsiders. That is why nobody cared about his unusual appearance, which was accepted here rather than feared. As he grew up in the circus, Kurt never had to hide his blue skin, pointed ears, and tail. Instead, he embraced his gifts and became an exceptionally talented acrobat and swordsman. The circus became the first place where he truly felt he belonged. Having said that, Margali raised Kurt like her own son alongside her own children, Stefan and Jermaine Zardos. Of course, Kurt loved them as siblings, and they shared a very close bond growing up. But Kurt and Jermaine eventually fell in love. However, the family's happiness eventually unraveled when Stefan was ravaged by a dark, mystical influence and went on a murderous rampage. Apparently, many years earlier, Stefan had pleaded with Kurt to stop him if he ever became a danger to innocent people, and so, in order to honor that promise, Kurt was forced to confront his adoptive brother, and during that struggle, Stefan was killed. Naturally, the townspeople blamed Nightcrawler for Stefan's death and for all the murders. As a result, the mutant teleporter was forced to flee into the woods, where Professor Xavier would later find and recruit him into the X-Men. After Kurt joined the X-Men, Jermaine followed him to America, where she took the name Amanda Sefton and resumed their off-and-on romance. Having said that, Margali herself was one of the most complicated people in Kurt's life, because even if she genuinely cared for him and gave him the loving childhood his biological family could not, she was also deeply devoted to the winding way and often pursued magical power at the expense of those around her. Plus, as a user of a mystical practice, Margali's unstable power waxed and waned. After Stefan's death, she initially wanted to seek her revenge against Kurt, but that was before she eventually learned the truth and reconciled with him. Despite her flaws, Margali will always remain the woman who gave Nightcrawler his first real home and helped shape the compassionate, kind-hearted hero he would become. Destiny. I think among all of Nightcrawler's family members, Destiny is perhaps the most tragic, especially because she is a powerful, precognitive mutant who is capable of seeing countless possible futures. In fact, Destiny knew from the moment Kurt was conceived that his life would be filled with suffering, but she also foresaw that he would become one of mutant-kind's greatest heroes. According to X-Men Blue Origins 2023, Destiny is Nightcrawler's biological mother, while Mystique used her shape-shifting powers to biologically father the child. Their dream of raising a family together was shattered when Destiny realized that keeping Kurt with them could jeopardize the future she had foreseen. Before that, let's rewind a bit. So, Destiny and Mystique first met one another in the late 19th century, and they have loved each other since then, despite having been in other relationships or long separations. Destiny's visions of the future was what motivated them to conceive Nightcrawler while living a dual life as a noblewoman and her handmaid. To ensure that their son would grow up to be a hero, it was actually Destiny who came up with the plan to get Nightcrawler adopted and then requested that Professor X erase her and Mystique's memories of their son's birth. Now, unlike Mystique, who often expressed her emotions through manipulation and secrecy, Destiny's greatest burden was knowing what sacrifices the future demanded her to make. So she made sure Kurt would survive and eventually fight Azazel, even if it meant him growing up believing he had been abandoned. Destiny knew that life in a traveling circus would offer him the safest upbringing and shape him into the compassionate man he needed to become, which is why she chose Margalie Zardos to be his foster mother. To preserve this future, she even allowed key memories about Kurt's birth to remain hidden for decades. That is the reason why Destiny had almost no maternal relationship with Nightcrawler during his childhood or much of his adult life. As Kurt grew up fully unaware that she was his mother, Destiny watched events unfold from the shadows and intervened only when it was absolutely necessary. She had faith in the future, and ironically, every painful experience that Kurt endured, starting from his abandonment, the persecution he had to face for his demonic appearance, and everything else that followed, which helped shape him into the empathetic, selfless hero Destiny believed the world would one day need. Now, when the truth about Kurt's parentage was finally revealed, it fundamentally changed how people saw Destiny. And while years of lost time can never be recovered, Nightcrawler's remarkable capacity for forgiveness has allowed him to begin building a genuine relationship with Destiny. Having said that, after being separated for a very long time, Destiny and Rogue also reconciled and reunited. For those who do not know, Destiny adopted Rogue along with Mystique and raised her in Mississippi. After their reformed Brotherhood of the Evil Mutants group evolved into the government-sponsored Freedom Force, Destiny eventually died in Uncanny X-Men issue 255. On Krakoa, after mutants developed a way to resurrect the dead through cloning, mutant leaders feared Destiny's precognitive capabilities and stalled in resurrecting her. But Mystique fought to bring her wife back to life and threatened to burn all of Krakoa down if necessary. After she was brought back from the dead and again reunited, Mystique and Destiny renewed their vows in X-Men The Wedding Special. Azazel. So, long before Nightcrawler understood his relationship with Mystique, he thought his biological father was an ancient demonic mutant called Azazel, who debuted in Uncanny X-Men issue number 428 back in 1963. In the past, Mystique had a brief affair with Azazel, and she apparently used some of his genetic material to conceive Nightcrawler when Destiny wanted a child. But like I previously said, Destiny later revealed she orchestrated the birth and adoption of Nightcrawler to ensure he would grow up to stop Azazel from taking over the world. It truly is funny to think that for almost 20 years, we and Azazel himself believed that he was Nightcrawler's biological father. This idea actually originated in the controversial 2003 storyline titled as The Draco, which revealed that Mystique had a brief affair with Azazel, who was the ruler of the demonic-looking mutant race known as the Neophem. Now, because Kurt inherited blue skin, a prehensile tail, pointed ears, and many teleportation abilities just like that of Azazel, this claim seemed to be believable. Azazel even rescued an infant Kurt after Mystique fled an angry mob, and it was actually he who teleported the baby to Margalie Zardos. Many years later, Azazel summoned Nightcrawler and dozens of other teleporting mutants to Isla Desdemonas after revealing how they were supposedly his children. The truth was low-key scary because Azazel had fathered kids across centuries only because he needed their combined teleportation powers to open a gateway from the brimstone dimension and unleash the Neophem upon Earth. He expected Kurt to embrace his destiny as his heir and stand beside him in conquering humanity. But instead, Nightcrawler rejected him to choose the X-Men, and together they helped stop the ritual after defeating Azazel's invasion. However, that story, was dramatically recontextualized in X-Men Blue Origins after Marvel revealed that Azazel was never Nightcrawler's true father. Mystique only used Azazel's genetic material so as to deceive the world of Kurt's true lineage. Destiny knew that Azazel would become a catastrophic threat to the world someday, and so they had no choice but to ensure the world never knew the truth. She deliberately manipulated events so Azazel would believe Kurt was his son, ensuring that, when the time came, he would trust and draw Nightcrawler into his plans, and that confidence ultimately became Azazel's downfall. In other words, Nightcrawler was destined to defeat Azazel long before either of them knew the truth. Destiny's elaborate scheme simply ensured Kurt would be raised away from Azazel's influence and grow into the compassionate hero capable of resisting him. Moreover, by believing Nightcrawler was his heir, Azazel unknowingly created the perfect opportunity for Kurt to infiltrate and ultimately foil his ambitions, and this did not just happen once, but on multiple occasions. The only tragedy is that Azazel spent years being convinced that he had found his greatest son, while Kurt spent years believing he had finally discovered his father. However, in reality, their entire relationship was built on a lie engineered to save the world. Rogue. Although Rogue, aka Anna Marie, and Nightcrawler are not biologically related, they consider each other brother and sister because of the woman who shaped their lives. Nightcrawler is the biological son of Mystique and Destiny, and Rogue was a runaway mutant whom Mystique and Destiny found as a teenager and chose to raise as their adoptive daughter. The couple took Rogue into their home in rural Mississippi and taught her how to survive with her dangerous power, while surrounding her with the love and guidance she lacked after running away from her biological family. In many ways, Rogue grew up with the parents that Kurt never had, which, by extension, made her Nightcrawler's adoptive sister. Ironically, Kurt and Rogue were enemies before they realized they were family. When Rogue was a member of Mystique's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, she frequently clashed with the X-Men. It was not until Nightcrawler discovered Mystique was his biological parent that he immediately embraced Rogue as his sister, and this was despite learning they shared no blood relation. From that point on, the two developed one of the strongest sibling bonds in Marvel Comics, and we also get a taste of that in X-Men 97. Their personalities complemented one another remarkably well because Nightcrawler is deeply compassionate, optimistic, and driven by faith, while Rogue has often struggled with guilt, isolation, and the fear of hurting others because of her power to absorb memories and abilities through touch. Kurt has always been one of the few people capable of seeing past Rogue's mistakes and offering unconditional support instead of judgment. Likewise, Rogue has always fiercely protected Kurt and has stood beside him during some of the darkest moments of his life, including his conflicts with Mystique, Azazel, and the painful revelations surrounding his true parentage. Despite having very different childhoods, they understood each other's emotional wounds better than almost anyone else. Rogue understood what it was like being raised by Mystique and Destiny's complicated love, while Kurt knew the burden of living with secrets left behind by the same parents. Their shared connection is the reason why modern X-Men stories frequently portray them as trusted confidants who tease, encourage, and protect one another like real siblings. This is also the healthiest relationship each of them have when it comes to family. Graydon Creed. Keeping the best for last, the latest episode of X-Men 97 shines a spotlight on one of the most tragic relationships in the lore, which is the bond between Nightcrawler and Graydon Creed. Although they share the same parent, Mystique, the two could not have grown into more different men. For those who do not know, Graydon is the biological son of Mystique and Sabretooth, which also makes him Nightcrawler's maternal half-brother. But unlike Kurt, Graydon was born completely human with no mutant abilities. What is even worse is the fact that Mystique abandoned him at a very young age because she believed his lack of an X gene made him weak. This rejection had scarred him for life and fueled him with an obsessive hatred of mutants. It was so intense that Graydon turned into the public face of the anti-mutant movement known as the Friends of Humanity. Throughout the comics, he built his political career by portraying mutants as an existential threat without even realizing that the people he despised included his own family. Ironically, Graydon and Kurt were both victims of the same emotional wounds, but they responded in opposite ways. While Kurt became one of the X-Men's most most compassionate heroes, Graydon allowed bitterness and resentment to consume all of him. Even in the comics, Nightcrawler repeatedly tries to understand rather than hate his half-brother. Because he is deeply religious and believes in redemption, Kurt sees Graydon as another damaged soul shaped by the abandonment he faced at a tender age. In contrast to that, Graydon rejects every opportunity for reconciliation. Instead of recognizing their shared pain, he doubles down on his prejudice and repeatedly allies himself with anti-mutant extremists. His campaigns have indirectly endangered Nightcrawler, Rogue, the X-Men, and countless innocent mutants, thus making him one of the movement's most influential human antagonists. That ideological conflict is precisely what X-Men 97 explores, because in the latest episode, we see Nightcrawler voluntarily defend Graydon during his trial while arguing that justice and mercy should apply even to someone who despises mutants. Kurt hoped that compassion might succeed where violence never could, but Graydon refused to change. The trial also demonstrated the fundamental difference between the brothers because Graydon allowed hatred to define his identity, while Kurt refused to let hatred define his own. By the end, Nightcrawler's defense ultimately did change the hearts of others, particularly Colossus, even if it could not save Graydon himself. If you think about it, in many ways, Graydon is Nightcrawler's dark mirror, as both men were seemingly rejected by the same parent, yet one turned out to be the hope for the world, and the other chose to be a mutant-hating bigot. Well, that brings us to the very end of this video. It is astonishing to think of the amount of pain, rage, and grief that Kurt might have had to swallow in order to remain this kind and considerate. Who do you guys think is the most toxic member of Nightcrawler's family according to you? Let us know about your thoughts and opinions in the comment box below, and I'll see you in our next video.